If you think I'm running over, just stand up and say, you have 3 minutes. Yeah.
I'm doing okay.
Are you going to introduce us one by one?
Doug took care of that. Yeah, sort of. Sorry, I was only told you what I knew, or sort of. Oh, there he is. You coming down? I don't have a job. I quit. Yeah, I was too qualified. Anybody that knows me knows that. That's why you're. I can swing a shovel. Start over.
David, you know, are they serving drinks here? I wish they were.
Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
He doesn't need me.
And test 1, 2.
I don't know. What are you doing here? Did you give up the CD? You were fighting.
I don't remember anything that goes on from one day to the next. But you knew that.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Very cool. Anybody wants to go around up here on the table?
I will be for probably the first.
Ready? I'm ready. Yeah, it's 4. Let's get it going. We're going to run this 4.
And we're doing good.
Yes, we are, sir. Welcome, everyone. My name is Larry Halbert. I am the president of the Sidney Historical Association. I just wanted to let everyone know if you would like to become a member, of the Sidney Historical Association. We're open 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. On Wednesdays and Saturdays, and you can visit our website at sydneyhistory.com. I do have one minor request. Please mute your cell phones. Please mute yourself. I did that just before I came here, so it all works out. On the handout that you have, there are very short bios. I did the best I could to kind of just put some highlights together for each individual. Of course, there's so much more to know about all of the participants. The great thing about this event, I think, is we really don't know what everyone is going to present or say. There is one exception, though, and that would be Whit Whitaker. He will at some point say, "Happy motoring." We know that for sure. Now, Doug Barnard is over here. This was his brainchild to have this roundtable discussion. So I want to introduce him now. Doug was born at the hospital in 1959 and graduated from Sidney Central High School in 1977. He had held various jobs, including 3 years at Bendix. He managed his parents' dry cleaner business, which was across the river, and then joined the U.S. Navy in 1985. And he spent 23 years in the Navy, and he retired as a chief in 2008. He then worked as a telecommunications manager at HUD until 2021, and then retired and moved back home to Sidney. And I am so glad that he did. And we've been doing a lot of things together, and he really put most of this together. And look at this is just wonderful. I just sit and watch, and he does the work. He is currently the president of the Sidney Veterans Memorial Park Association, and he's also a board member here at the Community Cultural Center. So let's please welcome Doug Barnard.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, guests. Thank you, presenters. Wow. As I said earlier to some of them, Larry and I were talking this morning when we set it up, and we sent out feelers to quite a few people to see if they would be presenters here, and they all rogered up. So with that being said, I'm going to keep this as short as I can because we want to get through this in 2 hours, and we have 10 presenters, so you do the math. I am on the board here at the Community Center, the Veterans Park, as well as the Alumni Association. Keeps me busy in my retardedment. Anyway, thanks again for everybody coming. If you don't know, the bathrooms, you go straight out this door, straight through into the dining area, and they're all the way at the other end of the dining area, but there's 2 unisex bathrooms. There's exit there, there's exit out this door, should anything arise. The community center would very much appreciate any kind of donations you might feel like making. This building is 225 years old, and we have limited funds, though we're doing good. We've done a lot of work in the last couple of years, and we want to keep it going. But anybody that knows anything about buildings knows that it costs money to keep them up and running. With that, I'm going to present our first presenter, Dave Plummer. And don't mind me, I'm going to be all over the place. I'm running the sound, I'm running the video, I'm running, yeah, I'm doing it all. So thanks again. Give me just a second.
He tells me these are on, I hope so. Hello? Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Back in 1970, I first was acquainted to a fellow named Franklin Hesse. He was a citizen of Sidney. He was actually in Mary Jane's class. And he is a local archaeologist, historian, antique dealer in Otago, as you know. Buzz and I have been good friends for a long time. So I thought that the presentation that I would make tonight is making public something that he did over in Henry Egley's site. back in 1970, 71, 72. I was invited by Lord Chamberlain to help them do a dig over there that had to be done in about 4 or 5 days. And as you may know, I haven't got a pointer up here today, but if you look at this map of Sidney, which is a 1943 map, and you follow the old O&W across, to the right of that, where it's right across the river, is a flat. On the far end of the flat is where the Butler automobile car agency is right now. And Henry's establishment started on this side of it and west of that. He wanted to build a new building over there. It was a rather large building on the flat. And Buzz had done some work along the river and found quite a few artifacts along the river. Fire cracked stoves, he found a midden, and some various things of archaeological importance. So he heard that Henry wanted to build that building, and we only had a very short time. He wanted to, he first bulldozed the area off of about the first foot of topsoil off that area, in an area about 50 by 60 feet. And he asked Henry if he could do some excavating there and do a survey of the area, see what he could find. Well, Howard told me he needed some help. So I went over with him. You want to click it to the next one? Okay, this is the area right here. This big building back here is Henry's building. As it was not there then, where the white car is the flat that we were working on. And then the lower flat, lower rise of the river is down in this area here. You can click the other one. That's the lower flat down there. Some artifacts have been found in there. Go ahead. This is a picture from Keith Clark Park across the river, across the top of that island, and that is the building back there today that they wanted to build. So Buzz put me to work right away. The red lines represent springs that he had set up a grid. It was actually a grid made of chalk line with stakes marked with those X's up on both sides. And those are 10-foot squares. We did not know what features were in there at the time. We knew that the area was, I would say, color. It was a tan clay color. It was silk color. Each one of those circles there and markings is a feature that was in there, either in brown or black or something which would indicate that they were either fire pits or post molds. The post mold is a spot where a post of some kind had been put in there years ago, but had decayed away and left a little bit, a different colored feature there in the spot that they were in. Some of those that marked are very small, or 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Some of the larger ones, which are very dark, within that area were square. Buzz put me to work, with pieces of paper, mapping each one of those squares and measuring the position of those features with a tape measure. So I didn't know it at first, and we didn't know what we were looking at. We couldn't see it because we weren't above it at all. But after we put everything all together, we found smaller, you could see the lines around that are connecting some of the dots in that one circle there. It was obvious to us that this was a longhouse feature of what they call an Owasco shelter. Owasco is the name given to the type of shelter that has been found in excavations up at Owasco Lake for the late woodland people that lived there previous to the earthquake. They could be anywhere from 600 years prior to the establishment of the Iroquois Confederacy. But then as we looked at it, we noticed a pattern with the square, little squares. I don't know if I wish I had a pointer to point them out, but they're the darker, small circles in there, which were actually squares, as if they were made of hewn timbers. And after we studied it a while, we said, well, it looks like we've got a new building, a newer building, or a historic building on top of a prehistoric building. And that was a complete surprise to us. The large circles up in the upper part of this are actually a hearth, a fireplace. He has one circle attached up there, which is the where we found down deep in we found historic, prehistoric artifacts. So the hearth was apparently used by both prehistoric people and historic people. So I think you can go to the next one. Here is an example of the Owasco shelter, and there's another one, Doc. Or that, and I think it's more like that. It was about, I would say 40 feet long and about 20 feet wide. Go to the next one. These are the types of shelters that the Owasco people used. We traditionally have called them longhouses, but that really isn't correct for that people. They predated the Iroquois. So that site could have been occupied 1,000 years ago, and probably was, because as you know, the two rivers, Unadilla and the Susquehanna River, joined here and were a common meeting place for indigenous people for many, many years, and maybe thousands of years. As I understand it, the Unadilla, as it's translated, means the meeting place. In this dig up there, we found this type of point. They're actually arrowheads, called the Levana point type, which is common in this area in northern Pennsylvania. Kind of just predates the Iroquois. And Levana points are commonly found in that area of the United States. You can go on, probably just look at that. So, we had already outlined Doug uh, um, Buzz and fellow up in the archaeological department in New York State had already outlined the shelter. So but they couldn't make sense out of the building that where the hewn timbers were located. So this is my drawing. This is my concept right here. So we can flip to the next one. Those shelters were very, very rude. And Buzz admitted to me that they were very rude and very rustic. And the early European settlers that came in had to do something in a hurry to think of shelter. And this is one idea. And this is another idea right here. And this is another idea here. If you want to go back to that.
Further?
No, go back to that. Yeah, I presume that the same area was used for a hearth, for a fireplace, and this would be a living quarters down in here on this side. There may have been a door on this end. There certainly was a door on the back end, and funny, but there's a little structure down in here, which I suspect is a privy. It's actually on the downwind side, so I would imagine that that's where they would privy. So anyway, continue to go back. So
Back or forward?
back, go forward, go forward. So some of the things that was found was a small prehistoric fish effigy carved in stone. It was probably a fishing camp for the early period indigenous people. We had some dated coins. George III dated 775, and the fourth coin was illegible. We had British copper half pennies. We had 15 wicker bottles we found, shards of glass, broken dinnerware, and bottles in the hearth and elsewhere. Some dinnerware was found in the main fireplace. Various glass pewter and brass buttons, gun flints and fire starter flints, broken gun barrels, lead puddlings made from making musket balls. So we had, in the same site, some of everything. We had prehistoric and historic. I'm going to wind up by saying that Colonel William Butler came down in 1776 under orders of George Washington and burned the village of Unadilla. And later, Sullivan and Clinton came down. But by the time they came through, everybody was gone, and they had chased the Iroquois east. or west in New York, and they all went up to Fort Niagara, and of course we go and then eventually up here. So that winds up my summary of what we did. So little time, so much to tell.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Hey, quick note before the next presenter comes on. We do have sodas, beers, chips, and assorted things in the back for donations if anybody's interested. We got water.
Thank you, George.
And one other thing while we're waiting for our next presenter is the slideshow will not be timed with the speaking. So it's kind of a two-part thing. You can look at the slideshow as it's going, and you can also listen to the speakers, hopefully both. Thank you.
Testing. Can you guys hear me?
You're close to the mic, yes.
What?
You're close to the mic, yes.
Okay. This morning I thought I'd better make an outline because I can talk forever, but I'm going to make this under 10 minutes. I got out the March 3rd, 1951 Saturday Evening Post article about Sidney, the village we can't do without. Didn't have a lot on Indian, but one thing that I really liked was that the immigrants here really favored the Declaration of Independence. So I thought about that. Then I was thinking, how many people here can remember where they were Wednesday, November 24th, 1965? Probably only me. I was in second grade. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and the principal, Howard Dunbar, came in to talk about Sidney history. But he tricked us. He called the village Sid till the very end. He talked about Joseph Brant, and I was so excited. I went home and I told my mother, and she said, yeah, he was friends with your however many great-grandfather John Ross in Pennsylvania. Then I asked my brothers, and Tom said, yeah, Mingo on the Daniel Boone show that you love is based on Joseph Brant. Whoa. Then my brother Mark really caught my attention. He said when Brant first confronted the settlers one time, his warriors were drunk. They had been drinking whiskey, and they put on the women's bloomers. So of course I laughed, but being 7 years old, I had no idea what that meant. I started taking the book Squanto out of the school's library. I took it out so many times they told me I couldn't take it out no more. However, I want to say this period led me to three of my passions in my youth: reading, Irish whiskey, and women's bloomers. Now, at the time of the revolution, a third of the people were for independence, and a third of the people wanted to stay with the crown. And the other third didn't realize how lucky they were there was no internet back then, or they would read the annoying things I read on politics today with the third. Later, 8th grade, Tom Robertson, who was, my opinion, a great man in Sidney history, talked about 8th grade social studies, the Longhouse, and the Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash. When I got to college, I took more courses on Indian. And then I ended up working for Onondaga Chief Paul Waterman. And I used to talk to Paul about the Revolutionary era, because one of his grandfathers, however many great, was involved. And I asked him, what were the most important things that your people tried to get across? And he said two things: the power of ideas and the power of the good mind. The power of ideas is individual, to be your best self, to look out for others. And the power of the good mind, power of the good mind is when people put their ideas together in a respectful way. So, in the weeks leading up to the Boston Tea Party, an estimated 7,000 out of a total population of 16,000 people in Boston had gone to protests about taxation without representation. Then came the Boston Tea Party. The people in charge of it tried to get the Mohawks to support them. And of course, we know the people that threw the tea into the bay were dressed, many of them, as Mohawk warriors. July 4th, 1776, that Declaration of Independence. The interesting thing is it talks about people, not government, and the rights of people. And a lot of this was influenced by Iroquois, because you have to be born of the soil to really get it. They wanted freedom from economic tyranny. Foundations of the US, of course, weren't laid overnight. Let's look at some of the Iroquois influence. One Paul liked to talk about was the 1754 Plan of Union by Ben Franklin. Obviously, the meeting was in Albany, and one of Paul's grandfathers, however great, was there. Franklin wanted to call Congress the Grand Council, and of course that's what the Iroquois have, is a Grand Council. They wanted representatives from each of the 13 colonies, and Franklin wanted to call these representatives sachems, which is the Iroquois word we use, chief. Franklin, of course, knew the Iroquois probably the best of any of the founding fathers. The Albany Plan was defeated. Next came the 1774 Joseph Galloway Plan of Union. And it's really not worth talking about other than in the 1950s, some of the Galloway family lived up in Sidney's project, including my mother. Articles of Confederation. It was debated for years, and then the Second Continental Congress passes it. The Iroquois leaders were there. It's based in part on the Confederacy. And then last is the US Constitution, which is a work of genius, and we should all be studying it at this time in our country's history, whether you're from a little town like Sidney or a big place like Washington, D.C. I'll end by saying, if you want to read a good book on what people thought of the Indians, because like all people, there's good and bad, right? This book by Gary Nash, Red, White, and Black, has some of the best things in it. Some of the early people here were saying, you know, the Indians are better Christians than we are because they share, they give, they take care of the old. Of course, they weren't as pleasant in wartime. And as I'm sure Mr. Plummer knows, Brant had people escaped from slavery that lived just outside Sidney. Second book by my friend Orrin Lyons is about the Iroquois contribution to the Constitution. And this is what Sidney was going through at the time. The last thing, obviously, Constitution. Thank you very much. I think that was less than 10 minutes.
Thank you, Pat. Very good.
Hi, for those that don't know me, my name is Mike Wood. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm going to talk about cemeteries, mainly Prospect Hill, but we'll start with the Pioneer Cemetery, which is located directly across the street. And I can't even begin the conversation without including this particular building that we're sitting in. They're tied together through history. This church was formed in 1806 by local citizens, and the first burying grounds were right across the road. This stuff was documented and deeded in 1806. The first actual burial was 1787, and that was the second wife of William Johnson. And that's the Reverend William Johnson. Care has been taken by locals trying to restore and keep that cemetery in good shape. It's an ongoing project. We've been fortunate to have a couple locals that have volunteered their time and their energy to do the cleaning and repair work, and that's Dale and Tina Utter. If you get a chance, when you're going into the library, take 10 minutes and walk around the grounds over there. The earliest settlers are buried there, their families, and actually all of the locals within a 10 to 15 mile radius. It's a worthy project. It's ongoing. There is an effort through the Historical Association to possibly put some fencing up for future protection. That's an ongoing project. Many of the early settlers, there's a lot of side stories I could talk about, but because I'm talking about two cemeteries, I'm going to shift right to Prospect Hill, which is the larger cemetery and still in use. Presently, we have ongoing restoration projects going on with the chapel building at Prospect Hill. For those of you that have family buried up there, you're probably familiar with the grounds. Section 1 is the old section, and Section 2 relatively new in the last 50 years. When the cemetery was first formed, Prospect Hill, it was laid out pretty much park-like. Trees, roads, shrubbery, and not just the people from Sidney, but people from the surrounding areas chose to be buried up there. If you think about the location, back when the cemetery was purchased in the 1870s, it overlooks the village of Sidney, and there were no trees or shrubs, and you could pretty much see it from every place downtown. And a very beautiful spot, and it still is. The present board, there is a lot of history that I could bring up and talk about, but it's a little bit controversial, and I prefer to move forward instead of looking at situations that have happened. But we've got a good group of board members at Prospect Hill, good leadership. We're looking for future fundraising for the chapel. We would like folks to think about their buried families up there and consider annual donations for upkeep. It is costly to keep the grounds in good condition up there. But this group is willing to spend the money to help upgrade and keep that area of the village looking good. Personally, I think it's a good project, and we have to honor those who went before us. They built this village and this town, and we owe them something. If you'd like more information, the museum is open 2 days a week from 10 to 2 on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And we have all of the information on both cemeteries. I could go on with side stories about the Pioneer Cemetery, and there's some interesting ones. But for the sake of what's going on today, I'm going to kind of cut it short. We've got 8 or 9 other people that want to talk. So I encourage everyone to think about Prospect Hill January 1st of every year. If you were looking for a good place to donate money, They're a 501c3, and they would appreciate your thoughts. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We're going to take a brief pause here, and does anybody have any questions for the first group? Anything they want to point out? If not, we can roll right into the next group.
I have one comment.
Mr. Sheldon.
I think it would be great if we could get a list from Pat McElliott of books that we could read, like the two that you mentioned. Sure. I think to have a list of that would be fantastic. Thank you. Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, the next group is composed of Dr. Dave Richards, Mr. Whit Whitaker, Steve Arundel, Jim Gale, and Ray Baker.
Good evening. Those of you who don't know me, Dave Richards. I used to work in Sidney in the police department, and that was a long, long time ago. When I was getting ready to end my law enforcement career, I was thinking about going into teaching, and along the way, I decided I wanted to go to grad school and get my doctorate, and I needed a topic. And I remembered as a kid growing up here, people, the old timers, used to talk about what a booming community Sidney was during World War II. So I chose that as my topic. I figured everything's local. I spent 2 summers to National Archives down in College Park. I spent another summer at the New York State Archives in Albany. And I spent a lot of time with Larry's dad down at the Sidney Historical Society when it was in the Civic Center. And I ended up with my dissertation, which in the end was 309 pages. And I'm going to start with page 1 right now. Not enough time, Doug?
How fast can you read?
Those guys on the commercials? So I'm going to start off with something from 1933. And the United States was in the Great Depression, as was much of the world. They'd elected a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in his inaugural address to the nation in 1933, he said, "I look out and I see 1/3 of the nation ill-housed, ill-clothed, and ill-fed." 1/3 of the people were having trouble even surviving in the Great Depression. And we all know about the New Deal and the social safety net that was instituted in the 1930s. Something got in the way. 1939, the world was suddenly at war. The United States was not involved until 1941. 1941, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States declared war on Japan, Germany, and Italy at the time. And Roosevelt himself, in a speech to the nation, said, "Dr. New Deal is dead. Welcome to Dr. Win the War." Well, my thesis and 309 pages worth of writing indicate that Dr. New Deal just kind of went undercover, and he ended up continuing to expand the social safety net during the World War II home front. And I used Sidney as a community study to show how that happened. Scintilla, which we all know was the only major employer in Sidney in the 1930s, had fallen on hard times with war in Europe looming. Then Scintilla started getting more and more defense orders. After 1941, they ended up getting war orders. The employment reached 8,800 people by 1943. 8,800 people in a community of 3,000. You think that didn't cause problems? Significant issues to deal with. First of all, where are you going to find them? They searched far and wide in a radius of about 60 miles. 70% of the employees at Scintilla during the war commuted. Well, that was all well and good for the first few months when people could get gas and tires for their cars and actually purchase a new car. All of a sudden, that was gone. Most of the world's rubber supply was behind enemy lines under the control of the Japanese Empire. Automobile manufacturing plants were shut down and converted to war work, and gasoline was rationed. So the first thing they tried were charter buses to bring workers into Scintilla. And that worked well for a while until they couldn't get tires for the buses and they were using too much gas. They turned to trains. The D&H, Delaware and Hudson, couldn't accommodate because they had not enough passenger cars or enough capacity to carry additional workers. So the buses continued on the D&H route, but the old O&W Railroad started running trains for Scintilla workers from Norwich to Sidney and from Kenosha on the other end of the line. So that worked until the end, nearly the end of the war. Another place they looked for workers for Scintilla was a previously untapped labor pool, women, particularly women with children. There were a lot of them during the war. So what are you going to do with their kids? Well, here's where the safety net comes in. There were 3,000 women working at Scintilla at one time, many of whom had children at home. The government came in, didn't do a really good job with it, but they built a daycare center for the children of working women up in the government housing projects. Speaking of housing, the population of Sidney more than doubled from 1940 to 1943. And here's the problem. What do you do with a war boom community like Sidney? All the explosive growth had been fueled by the war itself. And you really don't want to overbuild or increase the infrastructure, because when the war is over, and everybody knew it would be over sooner or later, what are you going to do with the excess capacity? So they walked that fine line. But Sidney long had a shortage of housing, and the first housing development spurred on by the war was the federal housing project, Johnston Circle and Bird Avenue. It's been a while. And they built over 200 units for families, and they filled up nearly as quickly as they were built. They also had a project in Sidney Heights, which is now Overlook, Pine View, and DeWitt Drive. And they used prefab housing, usually from Sears Corporation or Gunnison Housing. And they went up quickly, and most of them are still there today. They also brought in temporary demountable housing, nice word for Quonset huts. And they were over in the area of today's Seneca Street, and they filled up. They were dormitories. They weren't for families. They filled up quickly as well. You couldn't find a place to rent in Sidney. People were renting a space in driveways to bring in a small camper trailer. People were actually renting by the night spaces on people's porches to sleep during the summer. Interesting time. Many private one-family homes were converted into boarding houses as well. World War II changed the infrastructure of Sidney, including to the present day. Over 750 permanent housing units were constructed between 1939 and 1946. The hospital, and it was the hospital, Sidney. Little side story on that. The 6 communities in the general vicinity of Sidney, Sidney, Bainbridge, Afton, Unadilla, can't remember the last one, all agreed to build a hospital because there was one needed and there wasn't any available. And when time came to sign the dotted line with the contract to build the hospital, all the communities except Sidney pulled out. And actually the village of Sidney pulled out. So the town of Sidney agreed to co-sponsor the hospital. That was completed in 1943. And the first year, over 900 people were admitted to the hospital for various ailments. With all the trains running through during the day, the area would be the east side of the railroad tracks. They called it Brooklyn, had no access to fire vehicles and emergency vehicles. So the federal government paid for a new firehouse for the community. Housing the McDonald Hose Company included 2 fire engines, turnout gear, and all the furniture to get the fire department started in that new location. As you might imagine, with all the people moving to Sidney, they had children. And the school at the time was the current apartment building on Pleasant Street. But at the time, it was the only school that the community had. And the federal government came in and paid for a 9-room addition. They also built what used to be the shop behind the school for training war workers in the 1940s, and then turned it over to the school. They also provided funding to reopen what used to be the Pleasant Street Elementary School temporarily during the war as well. And I'm going to conclude without going to too many details on my dissertation, unless you want me to start on page 1. No. Part of my research involved interviewing people who had lived in Sidney during World War II, did oral history. And there was one lady, Margaret Sycon, some of you may know her. She didn't want to talk to me. She said, I didn't do anything special. I just lived here. Finally, I talked her into it one day. I went over to her house. She made a pot of coffee, and I had a cup of coffee and some cookies. And she started talking. And she said, well, I graduated from high school in 1942. And it was the day before graduation. I was riding my bike by Mr. Steiner's house. And Mr. Steiner said, what are you going to do after you leave school? She said, I don't know. I'm 17. What do I know? And he said, why don't you come see me in my office next week? I'll see if we can find you a job. And he did. She went to work at Scintilla. And while there, she met her future husband, who was originally from Buffalo, but his family was in such bad shape from the Depression, they sent him to the Civilian Conservation Corps camp in Masonville. And when he turned 18, he left the CCC and he went to Scintilla, met Margaret. They courted, they got married. The week after they got married, he received his draft notice in the mail. So he went off to boot camp in New Jersey and came home on leave after he graduated from boot camp. Margaret became pregnant with their first child on that leave, and she didn't hear from him for many, many months after that. She had no idea where he was. Finally, one day, a package arrived, and in the package was a pair of lace gloves from a small town in France with tissue paper stuffed in the gloves, where he'd written in very small print what had happened. His ship had been torpedoed on his way to Europe, and he was one of the only survivors. He jumped overboard before the ship blew up, and he'd been involved in D-Day and had gone into France, and he sent those gloves home to his wife so she would know he was okay. And he came home from the war, she stayed home, he went back to work at Scintilla. And at the end of that 45-minute story, which I've condensed, she looked over at me and she said, you know, I think Peter Brokaw was right. We were the greatest generation. Tom Brokaw, sorry. We were the greatest generation. So World War II, an incredible time to be alive and long-lasting impact on Sidney. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Up next is Mr. Whitaker. Mr. Happy Motoring. Afternoon, early evening, everyone. I'm Whit Whitaker, and I will carry that title on. Happy Motoring. There you are. Glad to be with you all and to reminisce. Dave's story does bring back names and thoughts of many wonderful families in Sidney and how we've all felt of one another. It's great. That's what Sidney, New York has always been about. My thought was to give you a little rundown on our business and an idea of the main street that I remember as Glenn E. Whitaker Jr., who is known to everybody as Whit. When I was a dealer, I would sign the contract with General Motors, Glenn E. Whitaker Jr., Whit, President. So everybody always knew me that way. We were most fortunate. My great-grandfather started our business in Unadilla with horse and buggy. Maybe some of you know that. If you don't, I'll quickly give you a synopsis. And in the 20s, went from horse and buggy to a thing called the automobile. They were with Ford and a little bit of Dodge also, which many people did not realize that we were with. I was fortunate. My wife, Rosemary, and myself have put together 9 documents that I've had here. I just brought one down with me of advertisements, documentation, everything of our business that we had. And I cherish these things. So afterwards, if you'd all like to see a little bit of this, I'd be glad to have you take a look and give you a little narration on that. Can everyone hear me okay out there? Yeah. Okay, good. So we came to Sidney. Great-grandfather, my grandfather, Glenn S. And as I had seen up here on the slides, we were on the main street. That facility at one time, as my dad had said, we sold 750 automobiles and did our parts and service there in that place. So I say a tribute to our employees and the nice customers that we had around here. When my dad came home from the service to join my grandfather in 1946, he was fortunate enough to know that my grandfather and my great uncle Carl had purchased the Kaiser Silk Mill. That building, as I'd heard it, that Scintilla and my grandfather had a correlation together. So they were able to have tools and parts and everything working in that building with Whitaker's and with Scintilla. 6 months after my dad came home, my grandfather dropped dead of a heart attack, unfortunately. My dad really thought we better get into the big parts business. So by having that facility, if you all hear about facilities, what it means, we got into the GM wholesale parts business, all due to that wonderful place and the great community that we have with everyone in the families here. So now we had the building on Main Street, 20 Main, and we had the facility down by the river. I joined my dad in the early 70s, and I'll tell you one thing that we all remember in life is experience. There was a horrible General Motors strike going on at that time on parts. And I remember my dad said, you know, even though it's happening, we want to keep the prices just where they are. People can get greedy sometime. In Sidney, New York, people have always been good. We kept the prices where they were, and it led to a lot of success with Whitaker and Son, I will say that. That's a great word of the wise and experience, what it means for now and the future for any of us. There was a picture of the bridge in 1936. I remember my dad saying that he drove Mayor Bates across that bridge in a Whitaker and Son Buick. And it was quite an honor to do such a thing at that time. When you look at the Main Street now, yes, like everybody, you compare what was there. These wonderful pictures I'm seeing bring back a lot of memories as a kid or as an adult businessman. There's one spot that I think of, I don't know how many of you remember, but across the street from our office where Hannah Realty is now, that used to be Stu Morris Department Store. Does anyone remember that? You do. I remember my mother would go down there and buy some shirts and support the family. It was she used to call him Stewie Morris, and it was a nice department store in Sidney. You look up and down the Main Street with our good employees and the great people of Sidney, New York, it kept that Main Street alive and well. An area where your word was good. I must say, I look at Doug out here, Doug Sheldon, the family, educators. We were so fortunate, many teachers, his family, to buy from Whitaker's. But your word was everything. And as I always say, good employees make a good business and a good relation. So many of you other folks out here doing business with us, we were so very appreciative of that, I must say. You look up and down, I saw in the picture the Star Lunch. Mike Trebo worked for us for 40 years. That man can recondition cars beautifully. He worked there and reconditioned sometimes 6 cars in a day for us to make a living for his family of 8 kids. That was Sidney, New York. People going to the businesses and getting a job and staying there. That was the thing. And it meant a lot. Kent's, you looked at that picture of Kent's. What a wonderful store. We all remember going in that basement, the smell of what it was, the bikes, Santa, whatever. It was great. Speaking of Santa, I was always so glad myself as a dealer, we would have Santa in our showroom. People came from a lot of areas. There was a lot of Marabito oil that went out the door. We'd have the doors open for kids and families, and it was fun. That was the kind of atmosphere that was created in Sidney, New York on the Main Street. Wade's Pharmacy, Fairbanks Pharmacy. Again, I'm reflecting on this. the word, the service, these pharmacists and the people delivering drugs to your home, no question. Logan's store, my gosh, I think my dad said that we were customer number 5 at Murray Logan's store. Half the fun going there was just teasing, having a good time, and by the way, getting Mrs. Logan's apple pies or her apples. My kids loved the apples she'd have during the Halloween. That's what Sidney, New York was. The hospital. I love saying that, the hospital. As we all say, the only one in the country of that name. The people that work there, wonderful. Proud to say my grandpa Whitaker got Miss Martin, Maud Martin, to be the first head nurse there. And seeing Mary Jane, when you think of the Gelder family, how they did so much in the field of medicine for there and the Gelder Medical Group. You go up and down. You think of Dr. Abramson was a dentist on the corner right there of Union and Pearl. You had the school just up the other end of Pearl Street. Growing up on Pearl, you didn't know how easy you had it. It was just wonderful. But again, you had neighbors, you had a great business like Scintilla, like Keith Clark, and certainly we felt with Whitaker and Son, all those type of things and many others, just like the farming community, made Sidney and the area what it is today. Our police department, the state police. My grandpa was great friends with so many of them, my dad, myself. We owe a lot of our success, trust and bond to all of those associated with the law enforcement around here. And many thanks also. Where you look at a small community, a good business, good businesses, housing, like Dave was mentioning, good housing, projecting, planning, working together, a chamber of commerce, a Rotary Club, people getting involved. That's when you think of Sidney. Think of the Mazzarellas with a bowling alley, a fun place. The rec center, which our family ended up purchasing and demolishing and making our parking lot down there. But how many people went down there? That musty smell we could get in there. There'd be boxing matches, there would be table tennis, dancing, roller skating, whatever, but memories of Sidney, New York. Memories live on, they're good for all of us. And as far as it goes, I don't think it'd be a better place to grow. Makes me emotional to grow up in Sidney, New York. It was wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Whit. Next up is Steve and James, together talking about railroads and transportation around here.
There we go. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. Well, I just want to talk about my recollection growing up in Cherry Street in the Brooklyn section of Sidney, and my interest in the Ontario and Western, or the Old Woman, or the Old and Weary, like those nicknames. And I just remember it was my playground right there, right off of my house. It's like where I'd play in the, what was it, roundtable, or actually the turntable pit, play like war games. But then when I became a teenager, I became more interested in finding out about the history of the ONW. And the first book I read was the William Helmer of the ONW book that he wrote in the late 50s, I think, early 60s. But I do remember it was like, that railroad was originally called the New York Oswego and Midland, and it was actually, the surveyor said that the railroad had to go through Sidney Plains, and there's no way around it. But the the company was brazen enough to solicit $50,000 of town bonding to actually help with the constructions. But I was going to say the heyday of the 1890s and the early 1910s, they had quite a bit of business with, let's say, the glass factory, lumber, flour, and feed business, the Novelty Works, the Sidney Glass Works, which is right next to the D&H, and the Cortland Carriage Factory, just to name a few. But the UNW is also a vital coal carrier in cooperation with the neighboring Delaware and Hudson Railroad, starting in the mid-1880s. Soft and hard coal was shipped from the D&H, and then the UNW took it to like Utica, Rome, and Oswego. So they actually did a very good business. And then later on, when the Scranton branch line was built from Scranton to Kenosha, the O&W had their own coal, and they became pretty prosperous, I think, in that period of 20, 25 years, around the turn of the century. But they also did good business with interchange with the D&H, because the O&W had 6 tracks for, like I said, a marshaling yard, and they were able to, like I said, send carloads off to Middletown or Oswego, or interchange with the D&H to send cars to Albany. But another source of good income was the milk business that they had. As a matter of fact, creameries were built all along the line, and in the early 1900s, UNW shipped the most milk down to the city of any other railroad in the region. And because of the increasing business, they actually had to build the GX interlocking tower with using a pneumatic interlocking system with a 25 lever machine. It was used to set the indication of 17 signals and the position of 8 switches, providing adequate measure of safety for trains passing through both rails. And actually, they did more improvements down in my area of town, where they actually built a 4-stall engine house. They built a coaling station, 2 ice houses, and was a water supply and a weigh scale. And then in 1913, they upgraded the passenger and freight house from a board and batten type building to some brick and mortar structures. Yeah, I was going to touch on World War II, but Dave Richards did a very good job talking about the war workers specials that ran from Kenosha to Sidney and from Norwich to Sidney. And they were timed for all 3 shifts at one point. But also during the war, to free up was at the major trunk lines to handle moving military equipment, supplies, and troops during the World War II. Oil trains ran on the O&W because I could imagine probably the shipping lanes were pretty hazardous to try to, like I said, ship that supply of oil. But yeah, unfortunately though, the Great Depression really did have a problem for the D&H. The coal mines were petering out that they owned on their Scranton branch, and also auto traffic was kind of like they were losing revenue. So they declared bankruptcy in 1937. But then after that, it's like, let's see, especially after post-World War II. But actually, during 1942 and 1943, UNW actually made $200,000 in those 2 years, which was kind of an amazing thing. But yeah, the post-war was not kind to the OW. And let's see. Yeah, so actually, they wound up tearing down the ice houses. And actually, they had a single stall engine house built in 1925 when the old original roundhouse was burned. And that was sold to Just House for $100. So who knows, maybe it still survives in his lumber yard. But, so, when they got the diesels, they dieselized very quickly, a 3-year period. They went from total steam engines to total diesel. And that's why they kind of didn't need these structures. They retired the turntable. And then after that, it's like they just started losing a lot of money. And eventually, I think in 1957, the judge declared that their debt had risen to $100 million and also included over $7.5 million owed to the federal government. So in 1957, I think the injunction barring actions by lien holders and creditors was lifted, and pretty much the O&W was given like a few weeks to actually get their house in order, but it didn't happen. But and they shut down, like I said, probably about 1 year before I was born, in March of 1957. But I also did want to touch on the D&H passenger train, because both Jim Gales and my father worked for the post office. We'd have to go down to, like I said, retrieve the mail and the parcel post. And I do remember finding a pistol permit card my father had. They had to carry, like I said, you had to carry armaments when he was picking up like I said, the mail and the other important items. But, and that's really about all I think I have to say about it. But Jim, do you have anything to offer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jim.
You can hear me, I guess. I just got back from a trip. I went down to Hagerstown, Maryland, and I was mostly doing Civil War stuff, going to Gettysburg, Antietam. But, the town I stayed in was Hagerstown, Maryland. They're kind of a railroad town. You go in there, there's a lot of trains around, all that, but they were a big, railroad business at the time. Some of these other towns like I've been to like Roanoke, Virginia, Altoona, Pennsylvania, Cumberland, Maryland. They were all railroad towns at one time. We have a neighbor one down ways here, about 20 miles, Oneonta, New York. You can always hear these things about the roundhouse and the freight yard and all that. And by all means, they were a railroad town. But I would say Sidney too was a railroad town, because we had, 2 railroads, D&H and the O&W. And there was this one thing I picked up here. It's in 1895 that about 32 passenger trains a day would come through on Sidney, and about 70 freight cars, trains. I can't believe that so many trains went by at that time. I mean, it boggles the mind. Living in Sidney, I never knew the history. I grew up, right by the D&H. My father was into the railroad. We used to live by the old spur that used to go down to Bancroft's and Keith Clark's at one time. And there was also a spur that went to Muds's, and we used to always play around that area. I mean, we'd go around thinking we're brakemen or engineers or something like that. I don't know. But we would, look around. I mean, it was fancy. And I don't know, my mom one time showed me a picture. I don't know, it was taken of our house, and right by it was a boxcar. And I guess, I couldn't believe, we were right close to the railroad. I couldn't believe that it was like only, I don't know, 5 feet or so. I mean, very small and all that. And like, I didn't, I knew all about the O&W, being in the, town and everything. I never lived, like Steve says, I was born 2 years after that went. But, growing up, I remember, a lot of the railroad. I remember taking a passenger train for the last time from Binghamton to Albany. I mean, that was before, I think the railroad, what was it, 1963, January 24th, 1963, that was the last passenger train. So I must have been about 2 or so when I took that trip. And, during my times in Sidney, I've seen the D&H grow from, it was a very profitable railroad. It came here as the Albany and Susquehanna Railroad in October 22, 1866, and after that, it was bought up by which was a canal company at the time, the Delaware and Hudson, and they we were really on the coal boom. They were big on the coal and all that. They had coal mines in Scranton and everything, and they brought it all up here and everything. So for a long time, the D&H was a proper railroad, but it was like after the war that things started to change. People would drive in cars and all that. People go on planes. The passenger service was no longer good for the railroad, and the freight service they were having problems with their own roads. Especially in the Northeast with the Pennsylvania and the New York Central merging, and that caused a lot of problems with all the, because it was a bad merger, and it kind of caused a lot of problem with the other railroads. A lot of railroads during the 70s went bankrupt, but the D&H stayed solvent all through its years. And then I guess after, Conrail was formed, they started to have a little problems, staying together, and they were bought out first by Timothy Mellon of the Guilford branch, and he bought like the Boston and Maine and the Maine Central, and they started the Guilford Transportation. That lasted until 1988, and then I guess the Susquehanna ran it. New York Susquehanna Railroad ran it for a while, and then, 1991, I think the Canadian Pacific bought it. Nowadays, you look out there now, it's not Canadian Pacific, it's now Norfolk and Southern. They're running the line between Albany and Binghamton. So, there's been a lot of changes with the railroads in the years that's come, so it's been kind of a very, long time. It's been kind of different for the railroads to survive and all that, but I remember kind of one thing, to put a note that Whit talked about the community thing down here. I remember the train show years ago. That used to be, I think I was about 10 or 9. We used to go down there, have the mile trains, and I guess as a note, the club used to have this big railroad train thing. This big intermodal, it was called an intermodal mile railroad train thing, and they used to take it around, and supposedly, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's supposed to be the biggest one in the world and all that. And I remember always going down there, seeing the mile trains going around, and it was nice when you were a kid, you could see all those trains and all, and you could see all the history of all what the railroad did and everything. It was great times. There was also notes that, trolley systems at one time were going to be made in Sidney, but they never, came across. This town was a railroad town because you had crews living here. The D&H, another note, had a engine house over by Cartwright at one time. So, it wasn't nothing like the things that only Anna, but, it was something having even engine houses. So, I think I'll end with that word so I don't have to talk too much, drive everybody nuts, so. Okay.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Jim. Next up is Ray Baker, our mayor.
Should we all stand?
No. You should not. Good afternoon. It's amazing to sit here and listen to the history of Sidney and what a great place it was to live. My goal is it still needs to be a great place to live. I hope 100 years from now, we're still talking about the history of Sidney and what a great place it is to live. Actually, as I am mayor though, my goal here today is to talk about the Sidney Fire Department. I've had 40 years in the Sidney Fire Department, and I thought I'd give you a little history of where it started and where it's at today. After a fire destroyed a hotel house and barn in 1 hour along Cartwright Ave, editor Arthur Bird urged the people of Sidney to start a fire brigade. Again in 1887, after a bad fire, he asked, "Who now shall say that Sidney does not need a fire department?" After 5 years of promoting from editor Bird, it was decided that Sidney did need a fire department. On September 5th, 1889, a petition was presented to the village board to form a fire company. In October 1889, Phelps Hose Company was formed and a jump cart was purchased. In 1892, Phelps Hose Company saved the remainder of Cartwright Ave buildings from burning and only lost the Sidney Flour and Feed Company. That same year, editor Bird asked again, why doesn't Sidney have a hook and ladder company to help Phelps Hose? On August 20th, 1892, Cartwright Hook and Ladder Company was formed. The first ladder truck was wooden wheels, and it was a Gleason Bailey hook and ladder wagon. It was drawn by manpower. In April 1894, the two companies met and formed the Sidney Fire Department with Charles Seeley as their first chief. In 1895, there was an alarm system made with a locomotive wheel and a sledgehammer. In 1897, they held their first fireman parade and county convention. That same year, the church we're standing in today extended its bell rope so the alarm could be heard at a farther distance. There were 3 fires that year. In 1900, Sidney bought their first 4-wheeled cart that carried 600 feet of hose, no pump, and it was pulled by men. In 1910, the municipal building was opened on the corner of River and Grand. That housed the fire department, police department, and village board. Will McDonald, as a member of Cartwright Hook and Ladder who lived in Brooklyn section of Sidney, believed there needed to be another station in that area of Sidney. So he held a meeting at his house and invited everybody, including the chief of the department at the time, Melville Cook. They ran with this and went to the village board and was given permission. On September 16th, 1912, McDonald Hose was formed. Sidney Fire Department's first motorized truck was a 600-gallon per minute pumper bought in 1919. In 1923, Cartwright Hook and Ladder was used in a horse-drawn ladder wagon, which was a big improvement over the man-drawn one that could not make it up Prospect Hill. Anybody know where Prospect Hill was? Also known as Straw Hill, nowadays known as West Main. In 1929, Archie Spencer from Phelps Hose Company became the first chief of the department. Excuse me, not the first. In 1929, Archie Spencer from Phelps Hose became the chief of the department and remained chief until 1954, making him the longest chief of the Sidney Fire Department, serving 25 years. Art Brown took over and was the chief of the department for the next 12 years. In 1934, Sidney EMS was formed with members from Cartwright Hook and Ladder, and William Burry was the first captain and remained active for over 50 years. The first balloon-tired truck was purchased in 1946, delivered in 47. This was a Ward LaFrance ladder truck. This truck cost $7,700 at the time, and the village took a 10-year loan on it. The last ladder truck purchased by the village of Sidney in 2005 cost over $600,000. To buy that today would be over $1.5 million. It's crazy how things have changed. Sidney Fire Department's Ladies Auxiliary was formed in September of 1949. In 1967, they moved from the station on the corner of River and Grand to the current station on River Street, which held Phelps Hose Company, Cartwright Hook and Ladder, and Sidney EMS. The Sidney Emergency Squad became paid in 2015 because they were handling about 1,200 calls a year with 2 EMTs. It just wasn't feasible. As everybody can probably remember, we were waiting for ambulances to come from the Oneonta area. So it was easily a lot of waiting a half an hour to 45 minutes most of the time. The department also merged all the companies together in 2018 and moved all the firemen and equipment to the main station. That was a lot of controversy within our department and within the village, but due to the manpower shortage, it just made much more economical sense and quicker response time if we got everybody out of the Main Street station instead of 2 different stations. There were several major incidents in Sidney over the years. I've tried to list some of them, and I'm sure there's some I forgot. Starting with the hotel, house, and barn fire in 1883, Sidney Flour and Feed Company in 1892, the Lumber Company fire in 1912, a hotel fire in 1918, Novelty Works fire in 1918 that burnt 35 buildings, Main Street fire in a Dance Arts Center building, a Kent's Building fire on Main Street, the Mulder Building fire on Main Street, a train depot fire. Of course, our major fire was the Marabatos fire in 1984. I'm sure everybody remembers that sad day. The Nina Pizzeria fire on Main Street, Pizza Land fire on Main Street, Smith Street apartment buildings, and of course, the 2 most devastating things for Sidney was the floods in 2006 and 2011. In 2006, the department made their command post to McDonald Hose on East Main, and it had to be open for about 2 weeks. During that time, we had daily briefings with the mayor, village police department, state police, DPW, state and federal agencies to keep all resources coming and utilized. We used the National Guard for security for floods in the area of the village for security. I worked for the village at that time and was the incident commander for the flood, but then after I moved into recovery, and Denise can tell you that took many, many, many months, almost a year, but 6 months at least we had what I would call a side command post at the village that the flood was worked on every day, the recovery stuff. In 2006, the fire department had their main building flooded, the training center flooded, lost a pumper, lots of equipment, fire gear, and lots of records and history. We also have had 3 line of duty deaths in the history of the fire department. Ray Hale with the emergency squad died in an accident on the way to the hospital. Clyde Miller died of a heart attack at the landfill fire, and Larry Thriller died of a heart attack at a dumpster fire. When I joined the department in 1985, there were 120 members and a waiting list. Nowadays, we have about 25 active members, still doing the same thing we did in 1985. There's a little bit of history of the Sidney Fire Department. Again, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody that spoke today and gave us a little bit of history of what Sidney's all about. I'm proud to be part of Sidney. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Now we'll have a short question and answer if anybody's got any questions. And then coming up next are 3 people from the Sidney alumni. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, we'll get right at it. Looks like we're going to make it on time. Yes, sir.
I wanted to bring up one thing, just to let you all know that in 2006, we experienced that horrible flood. Our fire service department, we were 5 feet under the water. People in the community, wonderful employees, we were bailed out. 14 months later, when Ray's talking about fires, we had our devastating fire at our facility. 16 fire companies were there. The city fire department, of course, was tremendous on there. At that point,
We felt it was the right thing, looking into retirement, got through the labor department, got everyone a job first. My wife, our dear Aunt Virginia, and myself discussed it, got with General Motors and retired Whitaker and Son after 98 years. So, go back to that fire department, how wonderful, not a soul was hurt that night. What had happened was 2 kids were smoking on the ramp, youngsters, they thought they had cigarettes or cigars out, they did not, and that was the way the place started. And bad memories, but wonderful memories of everybody and what it was in the city of New York. So just wanted to get that word to you all.
Thank you all. Comments about the fire, the Novelty Works fire, that was mentioned. The O&W actually over in Norwich loaded a pumper on a flatbed car and took it over on the line just like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this little site.
You got it, Greg?
Yeah, you're ready, right? You're ready to rock and roll, rock and roll. All right, next up is Doug Sheldon. He is going to talk about the Sidney Central School Alumni Association Wall of Fame.
Wow. My thoughts are a total jumble now. These guys bring back such memories of such events. Wow, my mind just floods. I'm now about to turn 84. And wow, there are a lot of memories that come back from this. It's kind of interesting. Dave Richards mentioned a lot about what the government did to help Sidney. My father, and of course our family, my father came here to teach in 1945. Where did we live? 236 Bird Avenue, in one of the federal housing projects that had a terribly exorbitant rent, monthly rental, $29. And I went to kindergarten in what is now the Civic Center with Ruth O'Neill, Tom's daughter. I went to first grade in the Pleasant Street School with Mrs. Edwards. I went to second grade with a Mrs. Larson who lived on Ritten Street in the Quonset huts, which at that time was being used for grades K1 and 2. And Ralph Bile, who said when he was hired that he was going to develop the best small town school system in the state of New York, and I thought he did, by the way, hired my father, who was teaching history and English and coaching soccer and basketball, to come and head a department which now follows on what the government did with that building behind the Civic Center, which is now the police department. He wanted the Department of Industrial Arts. And my father was to teach woodworking and cabinet making, and he got George Deal to teach metalwork and George Salisbury to teach Future Farmers of America. Quite the memories. And I should say on the New York Central, Ruth Peckham, who was one of the great guidance counselors in the Sidney school system, took a bunch of us to Columbia University for a journalism session. And we came back on the train from New York to deposit. And there was such a snowstorm, and I don't know where this hill is, but there was a hill coming home that this train could not go up. So we spent an extra 4 hours on a non-moving train in what used to be one of the great upstate New York snowstorms. In thinking about what I'm supposed to speak of today, I have several thoughts. One, this whole last section is all about the Alumni Hall of Fame. And when I get through, you'll know why I say that. And what I prepared, if I did it straight, would probably take 22 minutes. If I did it the way I should do it, it would take 35 minutes. And so it's a lot better if Larry gave you one of these 5-page things that you read it later, and I'll try and give you the highlights. If you read the first page, you would say, why didn't you title this Mary Ann? Mary Ann was my schoolmate in Sidney High, and for me, the most gorgeous high school teenager that ever lived. And I hadn't seen her for 40 years since I graduated, and met her in the old Welcome Inn one day by choice, by accident, not by choice. And she kept pounding me, why don't you join in the Alumni Association, which I didn't have any interest in doing. I was coming regularly because my father was at that time in a nursing home in Oneonta, and I wanted to see him as often as possible. And I wanted to be sure of my mother. And, but she pressured and I joined the Alumni Association. And after about a year, Terry Dermody said, why don't you become vice president of strategic planning? And I had no idea what to do with that. But together we had some ideas, and most of them failed. We tried desperately to find a plan to save the Pleasant Street School. We asked architects, we asked engineers, we asked construction people, we asked people who knew about how to find grants, we asked people who knew how to get grants, and it never became a feasible financial proposition, so we failed on that. And then we tried to develop the Veterans Memorial Park, and we were trying to do that in Prospect Hill. We failed on that. Prospect Hill, the people who ran it really didn't want to help us very much, and we didn't have enough. We had a good idea that wasn't developed enough. And in the end, it took us about 10 years before that dream or that planning or that vision actually took place. And it's interesting to say that the first committee that really seriously advanced it, of 12 people, I think 7 of them were also directors on the Alumni Association, which had started the idea with Stephen Anderson in the first place. But at the time, we weren't succeeding. We were still trying to get this developed. So Terry said, why don't you create a wall of fame? And I said, you have one. And he said, no, we don't. We have a sports hall of fame. And of course, it's true. They not only have a sports hall of fame, Greg has run it for I don't know how many years and run it superbly, but the committee of the best alumni had met and decided a wall of fame was too hard to do. So let's do a sports hall of fame. You can always get the school records, the Division IV records, the state records, and you can find people to put on a sports hall of fame. So we had to think about how to develop this and why. And after Terry asked me at one of those board meetings, I went home and I started writing. And between Saturday night and Sunday, I came up with the program and the criteria, the nomination forms, all of the documents necessary to create the structure and the goals and the process. The vision of it was to find people of excellence and achievement professionally, whether locally or regionally or nationally or even internationally,
and excellent and achievement in community service, whether with or through professional organizations or nonprofits, or simple giving back to one's community and to one's country. The first ironclad rule that I insisted on was the Wall of Fame could not put anybody from the board of directors of the Alumni Association on the wall, or we'd be looked at honoring ourselves and feathering our own nest and would not be taken seriously and probably would not have developed high enough standards. And they all agreed to that. But then we had another issue. A lot of people, everybody chose, the favorite person from their favorite memory. We had a lot of people who said, let's put Dr. Danforth on the Wall of Fame. Well, Dr. Danforth at that point was maybe the most prominent doctor in all of Sidney. He was doctor to all of the high school sports teams. He was an alumnus of Bainbridge. So he couldn't go on because he wasn't an alumnus. So then somebody said, well, let's put Bob Rowlands on. Now it turns out that Bob Rowlands, among alumni from post-war right up through the 70s, was one of the most popular teachers of all alumni, looked at as not only a good teacher, but as someone who knew how to support, how to advise, and how to mentor young people. But this was about alumni, it wasn't about teachers. So we made our own rule, and we now include educators because there was so much alumni strength and strong emotions for honoring teachers that had meant so much in their lives. And then, of course, I had to bring up the subject. The 20th century, at least the first 3/4 of it, was a male-dominated society. Where would you find the women to put on the Wall of Fame? And so we made that an important part of our mission to look. The first part was easy. We put Mary Ruland, who had graduated in '08, who was the dean of all Sidney school teachers at that time, all post-war right up through the 70s, and Lydia Metz. And we also put Ralph Pyle on the wall because we felt he did develop a superior school system that really is the foundation element of what I speak about all the time, the culture of Sidney and the spirit of Sidney. And it leads me to think that, because this is a historical society, well, if you were to look at the wall historically through the eyes of the people who are now on the wall, as of July 19 upcoming, there will be 102 people on the wall. And look at Sidney history from that perspective, just reading their profiles. What a different story you would get about what the Sidney education system, the Sidney culture, the Sidney spirit does in people's lives, and what those people go on to do, go on to make their impact, whether in Sidney or in other towns or other states, some people in other countries. You could spend easily more than a day on the view of Sidney history through those 100 people. Having said that, with the kind of criteria we had, let me just tell you about a few of the people on our wall. Our first class, we chose Tom O'Neill, who was a lawyer here. Tom O'Neill, of course, served in the Navy, served in the South Pacific, served in the Judge Advocate's General Office, came back to Sidney and basically was everybody's lawyer, whether you were an individual or an entrepreneur or a school system or part of the town or a company. And we sort of looked at him
as a bit of a father of the community, class of 33. Fred Vedetto, class of 28. He was a man working for Mobil Oil. He was just moving fuel. However, he turned out to be on the school board of Jefferson, where he lived. Nelson Rockefeller appointed him as a trustee of Jefferson Community College. And maybe more importantly, he was the man responsible for collecting and moving all the fuel that he could to the docks in Brooklyn to go to Europe to fuel the vehicles for the United States Army. And then we chose Bob Rowlands. And I can only tell you, to find so many alumni who would say, Bob Rowlands, yes, I learned this from him. Bob Rowlands, when I talked to him about where I should go, what I should do, Bob Rowlands helped me. This was one of the great mentors of all time. And he's on the wall because of his impact on other human lives and the courses that those people chose in their lives. And then the classmate of mine, and you can say, well, how could you have a classmate of yours in the first class? Well, I'll tell you why. He graduated from Sidney with honors, okay. He graduated from Yale with honors, okay. He graduated from Cambridge with honors. Oh, he went to Harvard with honors. In Cambridge and Yale, he held the records for the long jump and the triple jump. He taught in Yale, Sarah Lawrence, Northwestern, William and Mary, and was appointed to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is one of the most loftiest things you can get appointed to unless you've done something really special in the arts and sciences. That was our first class. I think it set a standard, and I think it set a kind of diversity. It's also kind of interesting that we have 3 brigadier generals among our alumni. James McIntyre for the Air Force, who served 3,000 flights in Vietnam and ended up putting together the combination of Euro and NATO pilot training programs for the new kinds of jets that came out after the Vietnam War. Pete Palmer, 72, Brigadier General of the Army from Masonville, ran all of the operations of the Army military in Iraq. Andrew McDonald, class of 83, Brigadier General in Marines. Dane Wojtek, Lieutenant Colonel, 68, did enormous things for developing education in the ROTC programs for the United States Army. Paul Beams, Lieutenant Colonel and a Boy Scout leader par excellence, a leader of men at war and a leader of men at home. John Juracek. John Juracek was a colonel in the army who served in Somalia and Afghanistan and was in Mogadishu. And he was the only surgeon anywhere near that part of the Mideast when Black Hawk went down. And he performed 22 different operations on the wounded from Black Hawk down. We have people in the arts on this community, on our Wall of Fame. By the way, we have a member of the class of 1907 who ended up being on the Supreme Court of the state of New York. We have in the arts, we have Andrea Kozak-Wakeman, who's got so many young girls, they just wrote each other until they got like 40 young girls and said, we want Andrea on the wall. We want to tell you what she did in the development of our lives. We have Tiffany Whitaker, Seda, who, of course, was a rockette for her entire career on the grand stage of Radio City Music Hall. Carlos Washington, 76, country music star across the country. Greg Norris, one of our educators, who I like to call, because of, you know now how old I am, I like to call the 21st century version of Charles Clark and Otis Atkins, one of the great teachers in music in Sidney High. And Jack Dool. Well, how could you, there wouldn't be a community theater in Sidney without Jack Dool, class of 43. The first director we ever put, Alumni Association director, was Wayne King. Wayne King was a businessman in Sidney and also in Bainbridge. He was on the Chamber of Commerce in Sidney. He was on the Chamber of Commerce in Bainbridge. He was vice president of Sidney Federal Credit Union. He was organizer of the General Clinton, on the organizing committee, the General Clinton Canoe Regatta, Rotarian in Bainbridge and Sidney, director of the Sidney Community Foundation. He was treasurer to as many nonprofits in this Sidney Bainbridge area as you could name. And of course for the Alumni Association, and he was the first director. I think I'm running close to the time. If you read these 5 pages, there are 46 people mentioned here, only 46 out of 102. We're kind of proud now. Oh, there's one I have to tell you about because this is kind of unique. Bernard McGinnis, class of 42. He was a nondescript student. He wasn't a star student. He wasn't a star athlete. He was just a student. He graduated and went right to work at Bendix. Pretty quickly after that, he joined the Navy, served in the Pacific, and in the invasions of Saipan, Tinian, and the Palau Islands. When he returned home, he went right back to Bendix, 4-year internship in tool making. He found his way to IBM in Poughkeepsie, and somehow in his 30 years there, while working full-time at Poughkeepsie, IBM, he earned his bachelor degree. He earned his master's degree. He'd never been to college until he was in his 30s. And when he retired, was credited at IBM with 26 inventions of practical things that work in industry and commerce, and 9 US patents. For me, Bernard Guinness represents what this culture of Sidney, what the spirit of Sidney can do, and how it inspires people to literally become all they can be. I should mention, in the last 2 years, we have added or are about to add to our board, or to our Wall of Fame, Terry Shrunk, who probably all of you know, Vice President for NBT Insurance, President of Sidney Parents Organization at one point, Sidney Chamber of Commerce, Board of Sidney EMS, United Way, Alumni Association, and founder of 4 Towns Forward. Tammy Barnes goes on the wall with her husband, Mike, because they've been not only incredible citizens in Mount Upton, particularly in their support of fire and emergency squads and the school board, but also they together run a huge business of a farm with 800 cattle. So Tammy goes on the wall. Maria Catherine Fisher, 98, was our youngest and we're always looking, our first was 101, that was Myron Kemp. The youngest as of a year ago was Mariah Fisher, 98. A surgeon in bariatric and minimally invasive surgery and trauma surgery. Yes, she served many clinics in the general public, but also especially veterans of war. And Kirsten Aiken, class of 2000, so our first 21st century member on the Wall of Fame. She was the editor for all of Major League Baseball publications. Then from there, all of Martha Stewart Living publications, and now 3 positions at Huffington Post, senior editor, head of Life, and editorial director of Life and Commerce. Yes, we think the Wall of Fame represents both our exceptional leaders and volunteers, and also the extraordinary best small town school and education in upstate New York. The culture of Sidney and the spirit of Sidney honors education and integrity, and the kind of loyalty that strives for excellence, community service, and giving back to the culture that espoused you. Hopefully, the efforts to create a vibrant Wall of Fame will also inspire our young people to the kind of careers and service and excellence that can await them. The profiles of the people on our Wall of Fame are on the walls in the Sidney High School, just outside the auditorium, and the profiles of our educators are on the wall near the district office of the Sidney Central School System. For me, it's a pleasure to have grown up here. I'm exceedingly proud my parents taught here. I've worked in New York for all of my life since grad school, and I travel the world in everything I do. I still bring my children and my grandchildren to Sidney every Memorial Day. And of course, I return for all the board meetings necessary. There's something special that happens here, as I think Whit spoke about quite eloquently. It's a pleasure to be here, a pleasure to speak, and a pleasure to serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Next up is Greg Davey. He's going to talk about the Sports Hall of Fame.
How are we doing on time, Doug?
We're over time, but that's all right, as long as the audience don't mind.
This is your phone, Doug. Sorry.
For those of you who don't know me, and for those of you who do know me, my name is Greg Davey. I always wanted to say that. Everybody starts out with those of you who don't know me. Well, if you do know me, my name's the same. I'm talking about the Sports Hall of Fame, but before I do that, I've got to thank Doug and Larry for putting this together with the Sidney Historical Association. I hope a lot of people can watch this on YouTube. It's invaluable information. And 2 of my classmates, Steve Andale and Pat McGilligan, were presenters, so I'm proud of that too. So before I start the Sports Hall of Fame, let me acknowledge that there has been a long history of sports in Sidney, recreationally speaking. And one needs to only think about the Little League Moose Small Fry baseball tournament that used to be held at the Moose Club every Labor Day weekend. That was the end of our summer, was the Moose Small Fry baseball tournament that happened. That brought everybody in from all the Moose teams from the state would play. And that was always a big thrill. For the adults, men, there was a Sidney Cardinals baseball and football teams. And there's also a little known team called the Sidney Cubs. I know Scrap Mazzarella played for the Sidney Cubs, he said. There's bowling, what can you say about bowling? What a rich history. I was part of the Bowling Hall of Fame organization back in the early 90s. When we brought Dick Weber in to be the speaker. And the names are amazing. And it just seems like, oh, I know the connection with Scintilla.
there's always a scintilla bowling team. It was a lot of competition just to be one of the 5 men picked to be on the scintilla bowling team that would attend national and state tournaments. Many pictures are available, I think, in the historical room. In the early 80s, the softball boom hit. We had two 8-team men's leagues that played twice a week. We had a 35 and over men's league, 6 teams. We had a 6-team women's league on Wednesdays, and we had tournaments every weekend. It was amazing how many people played softball around here. There's also been Joe Menzel. Thanks to Joe Menzel, he created a volleyball rec program that's been going on for years. And can't forget the stock cars. There's a stock car track, I guess, down where Echo is now. Used to be a horse track and a stock car track. And of course, there were plenty of characters like Joe Norton and Bill Northrop, Ray Bunzy, Satch Hallequist. I think, Doug, was your dad part of that? Yes, he was, Ralph. So you get that, and I can't forget, last but not least, boxing, with the McGilligan family being a major creator in that. We've had some Golden Glove champions along the years, so that's good too. Okay, so the Sidney Sports Hall of Fame, it started because I love basketball, especially the history of Sidney boys basketball, and I started creating these card games where I play this class of 73 against the class of 81 or whatever. And that led me to believe that I could pull off an alumni basketball game. When we pulled off 2 in 1992, had 60 players, raised $2,300, something like that, and we created a $300 scholarship. Well, it's still going today, but in the 4th or 5th year, Terry Dermody, the alumni president you heard Doug speak of, he came to me, he goes, how can we work this into something for the Alumni Association to do? And we talked about an overall Hall of Fame. So I got Tony Zeno and Dennis Porter, myself, started talking about it. And as we were talking in the old Toddy's restaurant one lunch day, Dennis Porter had a light bulb idea. He goes, hey, why don't we do Sports Hall of Fame like the sports banquets used to be? So he said, okay. I started writing the criteria of all the things that would eventually go to the Wall of Fame. And that's when Dennis came up with the Sports Hall of Fame. So I abruptly put all the Wall of Fame stuff on hold, and I went full bore into the Sports Hall of Fame. And that was in 2001. By 2003, we'd started our first year. And instead of politicking for who should be in the first group, we decided the first 4 inductees into the Section 4 Hall of Fame would go in. So that I like to call it our Mount Rushmore of athletes. So you had Jennifer Finnegan Petruno, class of 1990, an All-American. She's one of 2 high school All-Americans for Sidney track, by the way, Rob Monroe, class of 96 being the other one. She was a Wake Forest cross-country and track All-American. You had Randy Payne, wrestler par excellence and runner, first freshman ever to be in a national tournament in wrestling as a freshman for the Pitt Panthers. And then two coaches, one athletic director and coach, Fran Redmond, and Tom Robertson, the wrestling legendary coach. So those 4, it's perfect. So we had our first dinner. The next year we had 4 more go into the Section 4 Hall of Fame. Pam DeMont Tarnowski and Bonnie Shoemaker, coach of the class of 92. They both went into the Section 4 Hall of Fame. So they became our next athletes. And our 2 coaches were Doug Quinney, track coach, and Jack Jones, the basketball coach who led Sidney to their first ever state championship as a team sport in 1979. So we had that. And then, but our attendance was good, but it wasn't great. So again, Dennis Porter came up with this gem of an idea. He goes, let's do a legacy team. Let's get a team back that doesn't have to necessarily be state champions, but a great team with a great bunch of players, student athletes, and a coach. So with Wayne King's help, we started the 1950 football team. And I want to tell you, that was 2007. Those 1950 graduates were all in their 70s, and they were like dogs going to Coach Redmond.
they just stood in awe of Coach Redmond that weekend. And I remember going to him during the social at the VFW, and I said, Mr. Redmond, how you doing with your knee? He just got his knee replaced because my knee is burning like hell, but I'm loving every minute of it. He wouldn't even sit down. So we knew we had another winning idea there. So we went on to more like the next year we did. Doug Quinney came. He helped us get all the track and field record holders. As far back as 1963, he tracked down 93 record holders, girls, boys, indoor, outdoor track, and about 65 of them came home that weekend. It was we set a record with 200 people at the Elks Lodge that year. So we've had a lot of people go in. We've had a lot of great people become part of our committee. And just a couple of the coaches I want to talk about. John Pendlebury, class of 1930. I don't know how many of you remember him, but he went to Springfield College, got his physical education degree, came back, coached football in 1934 and 35. Football teams were undefeated, and one team only gave up 13 points the entire 7-game season, which is amazing. Well, he went on to Vestal. He hired legendary Coach Dick Hoover, football, legendary basketball coach Willie Lobb, among others. And that's when Vestal was a one-room schoolhouse. And of course, Vestal expanded to become a much bigger school. But a lot of people who were hired by John Pendlebury claim John was the reason for their success. Also, of course, Fran Redmond. Harry DeBloom used to coach all the teams back then in the 40s and 50s. Of course, Tom Robertson, Doug Fezenden, of course, Mary Morrison, who was Mary Vettenberg. She led Sidney Field Hockey their very first state championship in 1991-92, and also in 1983. Now, in 1982-1983, field hockey team went as far as they could go. They went to the Western Regional Finals and won, but they had no girls' state championship that year. The next year they went, and they opened it up to the whole state. So they went, they won the semifinals, the regional title to match the previous year, and then they went down to Manhattanville to play Center Reach, a team that was focused on in Sports Illustrated, and they almost won. They lost 3-2. It was a good game. It was a great game. Center Reach had only given up 2 goals all year, and they gave up 2 to Sidney that day. And I know we're short on time, so I'm not going to go over all the athletes, but just some of them to mention because of what they did afterwards. Pam DeMontanowski, state championship field hockey in 91, but her career the next year she won William Smith field hockey national title. Tony Ferrer, 2-time state champion wrestling for Sidney. He's in the Division III Wrestling Hall of Fame. Sue Ferraro, 77. She's the only field hockey player in the SUNY Brockport Hall of Fame. Jennifer Finnegan Petruno, I talked about already. Michael Graham, class of 2001. He also won the national championship at his college at Williams College in Massachusetts. Jean Gray is in the Lemoyne College Hall of Fame, class of 75. Amanda Haney-Bloody, class of 04. She's at SUNY Geneseo track. She was a track and basketball athlete. She went in there, Hall of Fame. Michelle Mancini-Benton for Colgate played professionally in Luxembourg. Jerry Marabito, everybody knows the Marabito family in Golden Valley. Well, Jerry went from state champion and player of the year in 1979. He went on and won at Potsdam State, and then was the assistant coach for Luke Cartasecca when St. John's went to the national title game in 1985. Rob Monroe, as I said, All-American steeplechase in high school, one of only 2 track athletes in Sydney ever to get that. Carl Peragna won the 1,500 meters for Haverford College, Division III, 4 years in a row. He also was a runner-up in the 2000 Olympic trials for the Sydney Games. He won his semifinal heat, but got 6th place in the finals. Jennifer also was an alternate in 1996 Atlanta Summer Games. Randy Payne, we mentioned. Pat Simons, scholarship athlete at Colgate, is a wide receiver, was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles.
Jerry Stone, class of 64, the first really superstar wrestler for Sidney. And that was and he went to Oklahoma State. Liz Wagner, Brian, 93. Joseph Wittishek in 93. They were teammates on field hockey and softball teams. Well, Liz went on to an All-American career at UMass Amherst, and Josette played softball and field hockey at Colgate. So, and Rob Cole and Don Laird, Rob class of 71, Don class of 73. They're both in the Campbell University College Hall of Fame. Gary Cole is in the SUNY Delhi Hall of Fame, class of 69. And one inductee coming up this year is special to me, Mark Serbone, class of 92. He played for the Italian Professional League and got named to the Italian Olympic team because of apostille or dual citizenship. And he went on to play for the Olympic team in Italy. And they went to Sydney in 2000, and he got the victory in relief against the host team, Australia. So I called the PR person, Jeff Idelson, the eventual president of the Baseball Hall of Fame. I said, we had a guy born in Sydney, or born in Cooperstown, came to Sydney, went to Sydney Olympics. Let's bring him home to Cooperstown. So we had a day for Mark Serbone at the National Baseball Hall of Fame, November 2nd, 2000, for he and Tommy Lasorda to bring their jerseys and put that on display for international baseball. So the Baseball Hall of Fame has had very, very impressive statistics. We're going to continue on. We take nominations all the time. It's a great way to pay tribute to those who were so good and so memorable for the rich history of Sydney sports. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Doug is kind. He's allowing me to correct something I didn't do. In the first class, I failed to mention our foundation piece. A gentleman who graduated in '01, that's as far back as we could go, 1901. His name was Myron Kipp. Myron Kipp had a general store. It was the only general store in Sydney at the time. On the corner of what would be Main and West Main, now the James Way is there, what used to be the O&W tracks. He sold it later on, it became the Imperial. Myron was one of the instigators for the creation of the Sydney Golf and Country Club. He was the gentleman who talked the state into bringing State Troopers Group C to Sydney, which was housed until 1959, exactly where the high school is today. And Myron Kipp, although he was only 26, somehow, because the Swiss company wanted to make magnetos for American planes, and the government said you can't do it in Switzerland, you have to do it in America. And Myron Kipp got somehow the Swiss to move to Sydney, and that is Scintilla. Thank you.
Funny, I always have to do this to the mic stand. My name is Doug Barnard, as I've been introduced by Larry earlier. Thank you all for being here. Thank all the presenters for being here. I will keep it short and sweet. I do want to say a little bit. My family came to Sydney in the summer of 1941. The country knew the war was coming, and Scintilla wanted a pilot, and that's why my grandfather and grandmother and dad, Barney Barnard and Edith Barnard, moved to Sydney. So that's how I got here. I was born at the hospital. I did graduate at Sydney School. I was 115th out of 118. Everybody talking about how great Sydney education system is, they're absolutely right. If I can do what I do and do what I have done in my life with goofing off, and I had more than 60 absences my senior year. So let's move above and beyond that. I am the president of the Sydney Veterans Memorial Park Association. That's a very proud position for me. I did serve 23 years in the Navy, and I didn't write this. I'm going to read it though. I've read it before. I read it to brigadier generals. I read it to president's cabinet members before. It was published in the American Legion magazine, January 29th, 2015, by Don Bradley.
Excuse me. 7 men from a tiny New York community were claimed by the Vietnam War in 90 days. The people of Sidney Center, New York, began to be wary of any dark-colored vehicle unrecognized that entered their town. It was 1968, and usually it was a black car that drove slowly into the tiny town of 500. Nestled in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains, the car would stop in front of the Methodist Church, sadly no longer there, the only church in town, and pick up Minister Harold Wheeler before heading for a soldier's home. In a period of less than 90 days, the car pulled into Sidney Center 7 times. As the Vietnam War raged during the Tet Offensive in 1968. Wheeler conducted services for those 7 sons of Sidney Center. It would have crushed a town of any size, but in one this small, everyone knew everyone else, making it even worse. But they did something about it, deciding to pay homage to these heroes. In 1968, Sidney Center had no post office, no bus service, no school system, and not even a single police officer. It also had no lack of love for country or shirking of responsibility to it. And residents believed in saying thank you to those who agreed to put their boots on the ground. Patriotism and service to country are no stranger here. This hamlet lost 2 sons in World War I and 4 in World War II before losing 7 in that 90-day period in different places at different times and for different reasons. The first time the black car came to Sidney Center, it went to the Barton home. Robert Barton was 19 when he enlisted in the Army. He married his high school sweetheart, Audrey Hathaway, before joining. He was a private first class in the 101st Airborne when he was taken ill by malaria in Vietnam. He died in an Army hospital in Manila on January 9th. Gary Tryon was 22 when he enlisted in the Army. He was originally a cook, but he transferred to artillery. Specialist 5 Tryon was in the 25th Infantry and died in Hua Nha, Vietnam on January 13th when an artillery shell exploded. He was awarded the Bronze Star for bravery. Gerald Allen was drafted into the Army and was a private first class in the 1st Cavalry Division when he died of small arms fire on Valentine's Day in Tua Tien Province. He was a volunteer fireman in Sidney Center before he was called to the Army, and was in Vietnam only 21 days before he was killed by a Viet Cong attack. It took the Army longer to send his mother belongings, his high school diploma, his watch, fire department papers, a check for $1.60 that was in his wallet, and his Bronze Star and Purple Heart than the amount of time he spent in Vietnam. The black car stopped at the home of 20-year-old Robert Gifford, an Army draftee who was killed by Viet Cong small arms fire in Bin Long on February 3rd. He left an 18-year-old widow, his high school sweetheart, Joyce Newman Gifford, in Sidney Center. Less than a month after Gifford was killed, his 14-year-old brother took his own life. Ronald France wanted to be a Marine from the time he was just a little boy. Everyone called him Ronnie. He joined the Corps when he graduated from high school. He died at 23 as a Marine, Lance Corporal, and machine gunner on March 23rd when his bunker collapsed during combat in Quang Tri Province. Ray Downing was known by his friends in Sidney Center as Butch. He was 21 and a Specialist 4 Army draftee, and died on March 3rd when a hand grenade exploded in Tua Tien. He left his parents, a brother, a twin sister in Sidney Center. He was awarded an Air Medal, Purple Heart, and Bronze Star for bravery. It was pure irony that local papers printed the news of his death on April 1st. It shared a headline with one announcing that President Lyndon Johnson was not going to run for re-election and was calling a halt to air attacks in Vietnam. Lawrence Mershad, 20, was the last of the 7 to give his life for the country. He was drafted into the Army and was serving proudly when he died September 27th of Viet Cong small arms fire in Dinh Thuong Province. On May 20th, 1968, Vice President Hubert Humphrey wrote the following to Edwin Lally, a community leader in Sidney Center, who volunteered to conduct the Memorial Day service in 1968, as the town prepared to give tribute and honor to the first 4 sons to die in Southeast Asia. Would you express my heartfelt appreciation to the parents of Raymond Downing, Robert Gifford, Gerald Allen, and Robert Barton for their great service and sacrifice to their country. These men died for the cause of freedom. They gave their lives in the fight against aggression. May I share humbly in your salute to them. I would appreciate you reading this letter at your Memorial Day dedication. It was indeed read. No one could imagine that by September there would be 3 more. Sidney Central High School was the school that served Sidney Center. The class of '66 was devastated. 4 of the 7, Allen, Downing, Gifford, and Tryon, graduated with them. Their classmates have paid homage to them at every one of their reunions from 1968 to the present day. Sidney Center would never be the same, but it would also never forget. In a town of 500 with virtually no industrial base, the townspeople were able to raise funds to build a monument to these young men and other veterans who died in service to their country. Those funds came from a populace that survives mainly from small farms. If you ever visit this town, population now around 1,000, you will see the monument standing in front of that lone, no longer there, Methodist church. The town of Sidney, about 10 miles from Sidney Center, put up its own monument to the Sidney Center 7, presented on October 8, 2002. The Maywood Station in Sidney Center is the actual train station for the town, as well as a history museum dedicated to the Vietnam heroes in particular. There is a shrine to all 7 of these boys who became men all too soon. There are plaques, newspaper clippings, and mementos. The spokesman for the center is Darrell Walker. When asked if there is a charge for admission to the exhibit, he laughs and says, no, and if you come visit, we'll probably give you coffee and cookies. Welcome to the real America. Don Bradley, is an Air Force veteran and retired broadcasting professional. He lives in Waco, Texas. That's who wrote that. With that being said, I will once again say thank you all for coming. This has been fun. I learned a lot, and I thought I knew a lot about the history of my little town that I was away for 43 years serving my country, 23 in the Navy and another 13 for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. But it's good to be back. My wife and I both retired a couple of years and we came back, and I love Sidney. So thank you all.
Right on. I did not know that. I found a letter.
I thought he was here.
Yeah, I know, on the road.
Yeah, I hear. What are you gonna say?
I'm good on steps. I'm good on steps.
Oh, okay, up and 7 down.
Yeah. He was everything to us, I'll tell you.
No kidding. I know after a while. Well, I appreciate you saying that. We got all the relay content here.